Another common question that I get is, I didn't receive my tax form. I didn't receive my W-2. It was wrong, it was incorrect. Or if you receive a K-1 from a pass-through entity, that was also wrong or incorrect. And people always question, what is it that I can do? What can I do in order to get it? So again, I'm a licensed CPA with just about 2 decades of experience. And if you find these videos helpful, useful, please like, share, and subscribe, as well as leave some comments down below. Happy to answer any questions or go through in more detail any videos that you guys would like to hear more information on. So with tax time coming up, the 27th coming up pretty quickly, a frequent question that I get is, what happens if I don't get it? My W-2 is wrong or I don't receive it at all? Well, the answer is you have a few different options, and I'm here on the IRS's webpage as the IRS always gives you guidance. So, from my professional opinion, I from time to time will refer back to the IRS's website, as well as through my experience within preparing taxes. So, again, number one, your first step, which as well as mentioned down here, so your employer is responsible for giving you, and actually required by law, to provide you with an accurate W-2. There's other tax forms that you may feel like that you should be receiving, and you might not receive, and you may not receive. So like that tax form would be like a 1099. Not every organization is going to send you a 1099. They're supposed to if they paid you greater than $600. But again, they don't always do it, or their system doesn't always catch it, or it gets lost in the mail. And those items I'm a little bit less concerned, because again, if you're receiving a 1099 for that, your chances are you're self-employed, or it's for your particular business that's a C Corp, an S Corp partnership. And you'd be reporting that income regardless, because you're required to report all income, regardless whether or not you received the 1099 or not. So you would report that income regardless. The area where it kind of gets a little bit tricky with the 1099s is if you received one when you should not have received one. Again, we could talk about that. The other item would be in relation to your mortgage interest statement, the 1098. If you don't receive that from your bank, to take that deduction. We could talk about what to do then, as well as a 1099-R if you don't receive a 1099-R. If you took a distribution out of your retirement account, 1099-G if you received unemployment. Once again, that should be received. All these forms are technically due by the end of January, but the IRS really gives everyone a leeway, so they have till late February. So if you don't have it by then, I would be contacting them if you don't have it by the end of January, to be honest with you. But again, okay, so let's go first. Let's start with if you don't get the form. So any of the above forms that I had mentioned, with the exception of 1099, which we'll get to that in a few moments. The W-2, if you don't get a W-2, your first step would be to reach out to your employer. If your W-2 looks wrong or incorrect, again, reach out to your employer and request for them to edit that W-2. They'll have to file a W-2C, which is a corrected W-2 that ends up getting filed with the IRS. Similar to all your other tax forms. So everybody knows, any tax form you receive that says tax on it ends up getting filed with the IRS, so that they have a record of it. And then your tax return, when you file it, your 1040, they end up cross-referencing it and cross-checking it with anything that you may have on that 1040. So again, that's really your first step. Your first step is to contact your employer, contact whomever the form is with. So whether that be a K-1, contact your partners or whomever the accounting firm is, or whoever the preparer was, of that particular pass-through organization. Contact them and just explain to them, say, hey, my records are different. I came up with a different number. Can you please amend, or can you please show me where your records are coming from? 9 times out of 10, they will end up correcting it. If there's an issue and is a legitimate issue, if you can get them to look into it, they will end up correcting it. But there are certain instances where places will not correct it. So let's kind of go into that, of the particular forms that you have to file. So when it comes to a W-2, these are important, because you got to report your wages correctly, your withholdings correctly, as well as your FICA tax, as well as your state income tax withholdings. So if any of these items are not reported correctly, and you go to put it on your tax return, and you go to e-file your tax return to being what you think it should be, chances are your return is going to get rejected. And again, as I always try to educate people within my videos, is you want to limit your touch points with the IRS. And the way to limit it is just to make sure that the information you file is correct and accurate. Now, IRS does allow you to estimate things. So if for whatever reason you don't receive a tax form, you are able to reasonably estimate what your expense was or what your income was. Again, but it has to be based off records, and it needs to be based off, specific items that you have. So you can't just say, pull a number out of the thin air and say I made $100,000 when really you made $500,000. And then go back to the IRS and say, well, I estimated that. They're going to say, well, no, you committed fraud. But if you say you get interest from your bank account, this is probably a better example. And I go and I look in my bank account and I add up all the interest I received during the calendar year, and I come up with $20. But the bank goes, later on, or the 1099 interest gets lost in the mail, and they file one for $30. Again, these items, that won't be a big deal. So that's something that you're allowed to estimate funds off of. All right, so let's jump on into the W-2. So there is a specific form that you are able to file if your employer refuses to or does not provide a W-2. Same holds true with the 1099-R. So that's the screen that we're on here. Again, my source is the IRS. So let's take a look at how this form looks. These forms typically also cannot get e-filed, and you may run into some issues with utilizing some of the national tax prep software. So if you do run into an issue like this, you might want to contact a local professional or just somebody in general that'll be able to do it for you, as they are typically it's a little bit confusing. Again, especially if it's not something that's done before. I've had to do a few of these, throughout the years, but you just want to, always step number one to see if you can get the employer to fix that W-2. So kind of going down, you'd want to put your name, obviously your social security number, your address, and then indicate which form it is. So W-2 would be obviously for your W-2. 1099-R would be for your 1099-R. Put the year in, so that will be, if you're filing it for this year, that'll be 2024, because your taxes are always a year behind, so 2024 taxes are filed in 2025. And then again, this would be based off of your records. What was your wages, tips, and compensation based off your records? So if you receive pay statements, pay stubs, whatever you want to call it, I would take my final pay stub from the organization or the company, and I would put it in here. Social Security wages, again, these are items that we had mentioned before in one of my prior videos, is that if you do a pre-tax 401k withholdings, that gets taken out of line 1 here, or A in this particular case, but it is included down below here. So again, I'll link to that video here on how to file your taxes with a pay stub. If you have that pay stub, you probably don't necessarily need to do this form. You could, but this is really like, hey, if your employer really didn't give you anything, like they paid you cash and they should have filed a W-2, and you want them to file a W-2, then this is really when you would fill out this form. But again, if you have a pay stub, you could probably just go on ahead and file your taxes. Now, if you do not have, the only time you can't is if you don't have that employer's payer's TIN. So if you don't have that number, you're going to have to fill out this form. If you do have it, you can use your final pay stub. Again, just be expected that you may have to amend your return if records are wrong or incorrect by a significant amount. If they're a few dollars off, a lot of times the IRS will just correct it and send you a letter in the mail, and as long as you agree with it, you don't have to respond to it. If there's extra balance due, they'll say extra balance due. If there isn't an extra balance due, then they'll say, hey, we calculated a different refund, and they'll send the money back. That again, only if you file your return. So Medicare, again, so Social Security also has a limit. So for 2024, I think it was 168,500. I think was the limit. I may be a little bit off on that, but I think that's what it was. So if you're a higher earner person, you want to make sure that's in there. Medicare doesn't have a limit, so that'll just be total comp, and then tips, and then the federal withholdings. Again, this number might not be known, but if you have a pay stub or a pay statement that you do have, take a look at that, and then you'll be able to see what that is, similar with your state information. And then that's really it as far as for a W-2. 1099-R, pretty much a similar situation. You'd fill it out the same way. So gross distribution, taxable amount. Again, if it's a distribution from a traditional IRA or traditional retirement account, it's all going to be taxable. These boxes you don't really have to worry about. Total distribution is only if you took everything out of the account. And then if you had any federal income tax withheld, you'd want to include it here. Looking down to line number 9, so they're going to want to know the reason how you came up with your number. So again, you can, however you did it, however you ended up coming up with it, whether that be a statement, whether you have online access, whether that be You used your bank account, some other sort of methodology that you use, you can put it there. And then you're going to have to also put here what your efforts were in order to obtain that. So you contact your employer through phone I'd give specific dates. Called them on this date, left a message, sent them an email on this date. Just anything specifics that you can give would be helpful. Again, you can utilize your pay stub or any information you have as long as you have their EIN number. So if they've provided you one before, or for whatever reason you're able to get a hold of it, you can probably go on ahead and not file this form. But if you can't, then you're going to have to go on ahead and file the form. You're going to have to paper file your tax return, as well as there's probably going to be a delay in processing it, especially if it comes down to the W-2. The easier method is with 1099. So if you receive regular 1099, so you're self-employed, you received a 1099 that you weren't supposed to receive, you can go on ahead and just you would report the income, and then you would report it as a deduction. So again, we can open up a example of it on the tax return. We're just going to look up Form 1040. We'll click on this over here, click on the Form 1040. So just so everyone knows, so I would put it more in other earned income. I'd put it down here on line 1H. You can also put it on a Schedule C if you wanted to. That may be the easiest route, especially if you're using a tax preparation software. You can put it on a Schedule C and then put the expenses down below, and I'd put it as another expense and put a description within the other expense and say, incorrect 1099, and put the expense that it is. So let's just say, for example, you got $1,000 1099, and based off your records, you should have only have gotten one for $600. I would put in an expense for $400 with the explanation of incorrect 1099 received. You just want to make sure that you report all the income, as you will end up getting a notice. So again, that one's a little bit easier to do, or the common one is again with PayPal or Venmo. If they send you a 1099K for personal expenses or private expenses, you got to report the income. Your step number one would be to call them. 9 times out of 10, they're not going to fix it. So you'd want to call them, see if they'll fix it. If they won't fix it, then, you can include the income here. I mean, honestly, in that particular case, I'd probably put the income within other income. And then it would come down and you would adjust it out from Schedule 1. I'll have to download that other schedule. So Schedule 1 will be other adjustments. We'll take a look at that. And there should be an other line on here that you will be able to put it on. Again, anything that you're going to be doing in a national tax prep software, you may struggle a little bit with getting items on this line here. So other income, here, this is additional income, so we actually need to put it in adjustments to income. So we'll keep skipping down. This is going to be an adjustment. Should be down here on this box over here. Again, anything that you can do, or additional taxes, so we don't need that. So this would be, you can also put it here as well. You could put it as other income down here, and then that's where it'll end up going, because this amount will go over to the face of the 1040 on that same line. So put other income here. You'd put the name of the 1099 on here, and then that'll be put where it should go. So, and then you would also come down here and you would put an adjustment. So basically it would end up netting itself out. You'd report the income, but then it would come out of your adjusted gross income. So the description down here would say 1099 received from Venmo for personal expenses. But again, make sure you have information to substantiate that claim if you are putting it on there. And then be prepared to amend your return. So anytime any of these things pop up, be prepared to amend your return, especially if you get a notice. You definitely 100% can amend your return. I do want to circle back a little bit back to the W-2 issue. So if you haven't gotten one and your employer is not responding, you can call the IRS and you can obtain a copy of your transcript to see if they did report anything, see if there's anything reported. And if there is, you may be able to get the taxpayer identification number that way off the W-2. So it is definitely worth a try to call up the IRS to see if you can get your transcripts. So again, the number is right over here. You can pull it right off the website, and you'd have it handy for you. So the only other last item is if you have a pass-through entity. I was pretty close to having to fill one of these out last year. It was in relation to a trust, or I should say somebody had deceased. So a parent had deceased, and there was retirement funds in an IRA that were left to them. And the way the account was distributed, it wasn't an equal amongst the siblings. However, the K1 was showing an equal distribution out of the IRA. The accountant that prepared it at the beginning was unwilling to amend it. However, providing rules, laws, actual details, and facts, I was able to get him to go on ahead and amend it. So always, like I said, so I think I had made a video too prior, that if you take an uncertain tax position, so if you just take a specific tax position, make sure you have facts, make sure you have the rules and regulations that you pulled it in order to get that position, and then state that, and then as well as state the remainder of your position for your support and your backup, and then typically that'll end up standing up to any sort of scrutiny that there may be. But in the event that somebody was unwilling to amend a K1, again, those get reported to the IRS, so you do have to end up reporting as is. You would then file this report here, which is notice of inconsistent treatment or administrative adjustments. You would go on ahead and fill it out, and you'd have to include all the information, all the numbers and whatnot within here, and then this ends up getting filed with your tax return as well. And then you would put the difference here, so you'd report whatever you report on your 1040. So actually you need to report on your 1040 the actual amount that you came up with, and then you would attach this form because it's going to be different from the K1. This could generate a delay in any processing, but again, just a small form that you have to fill out in the event that happens. So hopefully you guys found this video helpful. Like, comment, and subscribe if you did. Again, I think the most common area is going to be the W-2. It's just going to be a late W-2. So, either be patient, contact your employer, or utilize your pay stub. Just know that if you utilize your pay stub, you may have to go back and amend that return later on.